My name is Brandon. I'm a used car dealer. These are my cars, and this is my car lot. And I've started my videos off a lot like that, especially early on. And that's because I've always wanted to really feed into the transparency of being a car dealer, showing you the car market and what really everything's about. But it's tough now to really cut through the noise and know what's real and what's not when you're seeing all these headlines: the truck market's collapsing, repo crisis, car market crash, and prices really haven't come down in a way to justify using the word collapse, crisis. And really I want to talk about that today and why the car market hasn't crashed and will it crash. So let's get into it. Here's the thing, the car market is not crashing, and the reason being is because of inventory. Inventory is still a big issue, especially on the used car side. See, how used car dealers get their inventory, used car dealers like me, is we go to auctions and we buy cars from franchise, from new car dealers, from their trade-ins that they get. And what's happening is an interesting dynamic in the car market right now, because we really need these new car dealers to sell cars so they can get trade-ins, so they can send these trade-ins to auction so I can buy them. So one thing that is going on right now in the market, though, is that new car dealers, they're starting to load up on inventory. They're really getting up to where they have full lots again, and that's something that hasn't happened in the last 3 years. So it is a big benefit for a buyer going forward, as these prices are going to come down. But there's still a problem with that. Over the last 3 years, MSRPs from these manufacturers have gone up so high that even if these dealers want to move their cars and they try to by lowering them by 10-20%, these vehicles are still 20, 25, 30% higher, even after the discounts, than they were back in 2019. And this is a big problem for affordability, because that pushes monthly payments up. And then on top of that, with the cars being unaffordable, way higher values than really what they should be, it causes this big gap between what people can actually buy and what they can't buy, because interest rates are so high and they just can't afford the monthly payments. And the new car dealers right now, because demand's so low, because prices are so high, they're not selling very many cars. And if they're not selling these cars, they can't get trade-ins. They can't get trade-ins. They can't send cars to auction. If they can't send cars to auction, the supply for the used car segment, the supply for used car dealers like myself, is so low. So even though used car dealers aren't selling more than what they have been, their inventory that we have access to is still very low. And what that does is that makes buyers like us have to pay a little bit more for these cars at auction, which in turn makes us have to keep our prices elevated on our lot more than we really want to. And that's going to keep prices across the board higher, especially on the used car side, because there's just no inventory to justify any kind of crash, any kind of big whoosh down. And even though the demand's not there, because supply is still so low, prices have to be elevated. And we know that right now, even though prices, especially on new cars, are coming down, and they're coming down in a big way, prices are still crazy high compared to what they have been back in 2019. And you know what? I brought in a friend to show you some examples of this right now.
Here's what I did for you. I looked at the slowest selling cars in the United States. We've got the list back on caredge.com. And I looked at the prices that dealers were asking for some of those vehicles. The number one slowest selling car in the United States right now, the Dodge Hornet. A lot of folks haven't really heard about that, and with good reason. But here you go, Brandon. Here's a Dodge Hornet for sale in my neck of the woods, a almost $52,000 MSRP. And if the car market was crashing, I think we'd expect to see, I don't know, $10,000 off of this. Well, we don't have so much of a crash. More, we have a bit of a return to normal. You can see here they've discounted about $4,000 off of this vehicle's selling price, and this is obviously just their advertised price. Is this the new normal? I tend to think so, but maybe the Dodge Hornet is a little bit out there, kind of an albatross of a vehicle. What about a Dodge Charger, the second slowest vehicle in the United States? $40,635 MSRP on this one right here. When you look at the price history, Brandon, it tells a very different story. Would you call a $34,888 advertised price a crash from a $40,000 MSRP? to each their own, but there are some significant price declines that you can see in the market, but I don't know if I'd call it a crash per se. What about something that's not a Dodge, like a Ford F-150? We also did research just the other day that showed that 2023 Ford F-150s are the most overstocked remaining 2023 vehicle in dealer inventory. You've got a $75,000 MSRP F-150 Lariat. Let's go down to the price history. $65,943 is the dealer advertised price. So, that's a significant decline. That's almost $10,000, $9,000 off of MSRP. And it's not just the big expensive F-150s. Here's an XLT that's only a $58,710 MSRP. Kind of crazy to say that out loud. And the dealer's advertising it at $52,543. How about one last one that's not a Ford product, a 23 lingering GMC Sierra. Man, these full-size pickup trucks are expensive. Nearly a $69,000 MSRP. Dealer is asking for $61,494. So are we seeing price declines? Absolutely we are. Are we seeing a major crash of 20, 30, 40% on new car prices? Not so much.
So here's another big problem in our economy and in the car market as well, is that if everyone knows a crash is coming, a crash can't happen. So we're seeing this, we see headlines everywhere. We talked about it earlier, the collapse of the market, repo crisis, everything like that. And if people are scared and they're shoring up, if they're holding on to cash, then it's very difficult for a crash to happen. And it's not just happening on the consumer level, it's happening on the business level as well. You're seeing that banks, they're increasing their loan loss provisions. You're seeing that companies like CarMax, they know that more people are going to default on their cars, so they're preparing for that. And if all of these companies, all these banks are preparing for times to get bad and times to be bad, then it's going to be harder for there to be some kind of massive event that catches everyone by surprise. So you go back to 2008 when we had this big financial crisis. The loan problem with the mortgages, that caught everyone by surprise, and that's why it was such a big problem. And right now, everyone's expecting it. So it's very difficult for you to have a crash when everyone is expecting the crash to happen. And there's so much money on the sidelines preparing for this this big drawdown in asset prices, and not assets, but car prices. And I can give you just an example in my personal life. So me and my wife, we sold our house about 2 years ago, and thinking that prices were going to go down. And since then, prices have gone down in our area about 10-15%, but I'm still thinking that prices on houses are going to go down more. So we're just sitting on cash, and we're waiting to be able to get a better deal later. And the thing about it is, prices on houses, they might not go down from here. And in the way that I'm thinking is, okay, worst case scenario, they stay about the same, because I don't see any event that's going to make them go higher from here. And I just have extra cash to put a bigger down payment, or we can hopefully, as things go better for our business and for YouTube, maybe pay cash for a house. I don't like debt, but what that ends up doing is that pulls a buyer out of the market, but it's not necessarily a buyer denied. I'm not going to not buy a house. I'm just waiting to buy a house. And I feel like there's a lot of other people that are in the same kind of boat as I am, and not necessarily for a house, but for a car. We are talking about the car market. And whenever you have these people that are just waiting to buy, when prices do start to come down, if they do start to begin their crash, you have so many buyers on the sideline that it makes them stop the crash from happening. Because when the prices come down in a reasonable way, 20-25%, then those buyers are then going to step into the market. Just like me in this housing, if prices come down 10-15% more, then me and my wife we're going to go buy a house. And when you have these buyers on the sideline, it prevents this crash from happening. And that's what I feel like we're at right now. And no, these buyers aren't stepping into the market yet, but if we drop down another 15-20%, then that's going to bring a whole new segment of buyers into the market that is sitting on the sideline, that does have cash sitting there waiting to pounce. And when you have that kind of setup and there's no surprise and people are expecting this to happen, a crash can't happen. So here's the big problem for car dealers right now and why they're not lowering their prices, and frankly why they can't. And it's the same on the new car dealer side and the used car dealer side. It's all about what we as dealers had to pay for these vehicles. And when you're looking at the new car, the franchise store side of things, when these manufacturers are giving them vehicles that are even what the dealers have to pay, probably about $10,000 more than what they should even be selling these cars for to be able to move them. If a franchise dealer has 200, 300 cars on their lot, and they need to sell cars, so they need to mark them down to what people will actually buy them for, and that's probably $10,000 to $15,000 less than what they're actually selling them for today. Even a massive store that's got lots and lots of money on the franchise side, they can't stomach a loss of 300 cars times $15,000 just to get them down to where people will actually buy them. Even these big franchise stores that have tons and tons of money, they can't stomach that kind of loss, so they can't move cars down to values where people can actually afford to buy them right now. And really this is by design, because over the last 3 years, these manufacturers, they've been able to put out way less vehicles than they had prior. So what they have to do is they have to make more per car. And what that pushes them to do is lean into, give Ford as an example, I use that a lot, into these high margin F-150s and not producing some of the things that are more popular with consumers right now, like the Ford Maverick. Ford Maverick, I mean, whatever your opinion is on the Ford Maverick, they sold and people want them, and because they want them because of the price point. But you couldn't go to a dealership, even now when inventory is stacking up, it's very hard for you to go and find a Ford Maverick on any dealer lots, because as soon as they're getting them in, they're selling them, because people want a $25,000 to $30,000 truck, and the Ford Maverick's the only way that you can really get that on a Ford lot. And but Ford is not going towards what consumers actually want to buy, what consumers can actually afford. They're sticking with the high margin trucks because they might make 4 times the money on that one F-150 that they're going to make on the Ford Maverick. So it makes sense as a business for them to pump out these F-150s and get them to their dealers and scale back on the Ford Mavericks. But really, what the people want is they want a cheap truck. But Ford doesn't want to sell you a cheap truck. They want to sell you that high margin product. And on the used car side, it's even worse, because what's coming into play is their floor plans, their cost to actually buy these vehicles. Well, a lot of people don't know that car dealers, especially on the used side, they don't actually own their inventory. A lot of them use credit. They use like a credit card to swipe to get their cars. And that means that as these cars sit, they pay interest on them. And that means added fees, added payments on top of the cost of they actually have in the car. So when you go through a time period where it's slower like it is now, and the cost keeps rising every month on these vehicles, it gets to a point where what these vehicles can actually sell for, these dealers can have more in them than the car is actually worth, and the dealers get underwater. So it forces their hand. It causes them to keep their prices elevated, even though they know that they can't sell it for the price that they're trying to ask for these cars, because if they lower the price, then they're going to go into the negative money on the car. And this is money that these dealers didn't have in the first place, because they were borrowing this money to actually load their inventory, to actually buy cars for their lot. And if they take massive hits on every single one of their cars because they paid too much for them maybe a month, 2 months ago, and now the market has come down, then it puts them in a place where they can't lower it any further, because if they lower their prices even further, they're going to have to pay the difference to their financing company, to their floor plan company that they're borrowing this money from, and it's money they didn't have to begin with, and they can't make their payments, they can't pay the difference, then their floor plans are going to get diminished. And when their floor plans get diminished, they can't buy any more inventory. If you can't buy inventory in the car business, you can't sell cars. If you can't sell cars, you can't make any money. If you can't make any money, why are you in business? And this is the kind of thing that can put a lot of car dealers that have foolishly paid too much for their cars out of business. And it's a big reason now why you're not seeing car dealers lower their prices when they should be, because they just can't. So there's another thing that's keeping this market from crashing. As you can see behind me, if you're watching my videos, usually I have lots. This whole row of cars is full, but we've got some empty spaces, and that's because a couple days ago we sold 7 cars in one day. And we sell cheaper cars, so when the economy's not doing great, when times are getting a little bit worse, we're still pretty steady. But there's still buyers out there. People still have jobs. The economy hasn't tanked, and as long as people still can go to work, as long as they can still get paid, as long as they still need transportation to get to work, people are still going to buy cars. And we're seeing that right now in this market, even though people are holding on to their wallets a little bit tighter, even though that lending is getting tighter and it's tougher for people to get loans. Consumers are still buying cars, and until consumers stop, until dealers are willing to dump prices, if they're able to dump prices, until you have some kind of massive event that's going to surprise us, then the car market, it's not going to crash. The inventory is not there for it, and unfortunately, we're probably going to be sticking around with high prices for the foreseeable future. They've got in them. No, that's not making sense. Okay.
All right, man. Now I know that you use my intros as bloopers, so I'm not going to give you as much material. Hope this is helpful. Sound check. Yeah, we're good to go.
Why really? Horn going off. Of course. Both new and used. Nope.
Hope that's useful for you, man.